I was asked to talk a little bit about collaborative strategies and how what we've seen that works and doesn't work in this area. By way of introduction, my name is Greg Mader. I'm president of Open Source Integrators. We are a proud member of the OCA, the OCA, and have been Max, who you'll meet shortly, is their vice president. He's one of our staff members. We've been following government budgeting projects for about 5 years. And originally it was with the World Bank, who did a benchmark with Open ERP about 5 years ago. And since then we've been following the work that others have done as well as the work we've done for budget planning, budget execution, and budget management tasks. So there's a little bit of knowledge we've been gleaning for the last few years as we've been following this. My impression of the work that you've done is you have set the bar for everybody else in the world. You are the world leader in your open source approach to a budget management system. So good work. So why do organizations or people collaborate? And this is, I don't think this is something that we think about enough maybe, but there's distinctive reasons why it makes sense to collaborate with each other. Sharing risks, cost, knowledge, and experiences are all reasons that I hear, and I've heard all of those already today. I'd like to focus on the first couple of these, the first two, sharing risks and sharing costs. In looking at, I need to explain this slide a little bit. The red line is software that was purchased from a commercial vendor, whether it's Oracle, SAP, or similar sorts of companies. And the blue line represents locally developed software, which is the approach that you took ultimately. This doesn't necessarily mean it's open source, but it's a proxy. It's a way of demonstrating something that's pretty close to what you're doing. What we see in the cost trend is that the commercial software in 80 plus financial management systems, primarily budget management and budget execution systems, the COT system is always more expensive. And the locally developed software is significantly cheaper on a trend line. So with the open source approach, I believe there's an opportunity to be even less expensive than the locally developed software approach because you have the opportunity to share your cost and risks with others. By also having a publisher such as Odoo, the company, and this isn't, I don't work for them, but they provide warranties, bug fixes, and security patches so that you still get the benefit of a commercial software at a much lower cost. Long term. So a question you might be asking yourself is, what is this going to cost over the long haul? What's the life cycle cost? Again, the studies that have been done on this is that locally developed software is significantly cheaper. And I believe the open source approach, from our experience with this, has the potential to be cheaper yet, again, due to reuse and the ability to share those risks. So I think we can demonstrate pretty clearly that there's a financial benefit for collaboration. And that's one of the things that I think perhaps needs to be said, is that if you're willing to work with other countries and other organizations, that there's the opportunity to save significant cost here. So I think the Inter-American Development Bank has done a great job of trying to foster these sorts of relationships, and there's one of your avenues potentially for making this happen. So is it more risky? May I ask a question? Who thinks the open source approach might be a more risky approach than the commercial approach? Nobody? Okay. Maybe it doesn't translate well. There's no difference when the analysis has been done about project success or failure between the two approaches. Whether you take a commercial off-the-shelf approach or a locally developed software approach, the reasons a project fails turn out to be the reason projects fail every time. It's project management and change management problems. It's scope, schedule, and budget. this turns out to just be run your project well, regardless of the technology, and you will have success. If you run it poorly, you're going to have a poor project. Cool. Does this surprise anybody that there's no difference in the risks? Okay. So finally, this has come to the point where the World Bank, in their studies on this, are actually making the recommendation that open source is an alternative that should be considered. And we are personally aware of several other World Bank funded financial management systems that are using Odoo and have been deployed successfully and are getting traction with those customers. You are, by our understanding, the furthest ahead on this, and you've done something very remarkable, but you're not alone in this approach or this technology platform. So what models for collaboration have we seen? There's been a number, and they're worth talking about for just a minute. We believe there is a collaboration that's necessary with the editor or publisher. They have a desire to create long-term, fruitful relationships for everybody. It's easy to manage because it's just contracts. There's not governance. You don't have to argue about semantics. You just have to argue about a contract. So there's a place for them in the ecosystem. Consortiums, joint ventures, sometimes multi-government collaborations, often with the idea that they can create a profitable software solution on their own. I'll talk more about that in a second. It is important to have a services teaming arrangement with outside vendors and partners, and I've met some of them here in Uruguay, and they're very talented, and I think you're off to a good start with building that community of vendors that is going to be able to collaborate and help you build something that's going to be sustainable for the long term. Something that's very short term, but we've seen work very well, is for specific functionality to create like a crowdfunding or bounty sort of program. And it's not going to, you can't build a whole enterprise operation on that, but there might be some specific functionality that you find that's an easy way to get that done and in a cost-effective manner. And lastly, there is this sense of informal communities of interest, and there's a number of these in the Odoo community. Obviously, there's people that are interested in government budgeting, myself being part of that community, and Nomar being another, and we end up talking about this regularly. But there's other communities as well around things like project management, field service management, construction management. So there's industry knowledge that perhaps can help make your projects faster and more effective as you go. Let's see. So I would like to talk briefly about this idea of a consortium or a joint venture. This works when partners are in a long-term relationship that's unlikely to change. Specifically, it's often geography and language, like two municipalities or states or countries next to each other that share language and legal traditions are often will look at things like this. It requires a lot of negotiation to establish. It does require a governance board and joint charter. And what I've seen every time I've seen this tried is that they're unlikely to actually deliver the business objectives desired by the member, whether it's profit, schedule, scope. Perhaps others have better experiences with this than I do, but in general, these seem to have a fatal flaw of getting stuck in details and not delivering on the business requirements that the customers are actually looking for. So that gets back to these collaboration models and collaborative strategies. We've seen all of these work successfully in the Odoo environment. Every one of these has delivered mutual benefit to the other parties in the ecosystem, and by doing that, we're all able to kind of grow a little bit faster and be more effective in the work we're trying to do. Some benefits to this approach that I really thought about that I think are very important. With this model and a healthy ecosystem, there is an incentive for security patches and fixes and upgrades. There's an incentive for evolution of the code into new and different functionality because it works to people's self-interest as well as mutual interest to continue to drive new projects and new work. There is a strong sense of professionalism within the ODU community. We all know each other, we all know who does good work, and we know why they do good work, and we're constantly learning from each other. From my perspective within the ODU community, that's what I feel like I'm here for today, is to invite new friends from Uruguay to come join us. We think we're really impressed with what you've done, the level of professionalism we've seen, and we'd like you to be part of our family. That gets to this healthy ecosystem where we do think all parties can benefit. So what do we see out of this that kind of functionally? So we do see that there is this sense of an open core that's very flexible and allows changes. And I think you've already discovered within the ODU software how flexible it really is and how much you can change it. And that's by design. That's what the community and the publisher have insisted on, is that we have this openness and flexibility. There is this sense of open innovation as well, this transparency, that we all have a roadmap that we can see and we can work together in a decentralized manner. There's not an overall marshal or chief telling us what to do, but strangely enough, we kind of self-organize into organizations that find ways of working together and making something amazing. And the sense of community is really important. So I felt that from the moment I got in touch with the staff in Uruguay, was they had this desire, they already had a community here and they desired to work with the broader community. So that was really important to get that feeling from you. And lastly, in this ecosystem as well, I've mentioned this, but participants exchange work sometimes for money, sometimes for free, but in a free manner without coercion, and they have this motive to deliver excellence. Reputation and the gift culture are actually extremely important for how we work. So I wanted to get a map like this for the the Inter-America Development Bank, and I wasn't able to pull something together this quickly. This is the 90 or so projects that the World Bank has done that are very similar to yours, and they've been studying all of these projects and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And if you look at, there's over 35 projects in the Caribbean and Latin America that the World Bank has sponsored. And I think the Inter-America Development Bank has done at least that amount. I look forward to learning more about that. So we can see that there's this opportunity to work internationally with each other. And that's, beyond that, I believe there's this ability to work with states, counties, municipalities as well. All of them have similar needs. When I've studied this, what I believe the case is that NGOs, publicly financed corporations, municipalities, all of these different sorts of government agencies or non-governmental agencies all need very similar tools for treasury management, for budget planning, budget execution, purchasing, procurement. There's a lot out here that jointly a lot of different organizations and people need. A guess at what I think possible projects could be. You've got a really good budget execution system. I know, and it interfaces with your treasury, and I think it interfaces with your procurement and payment. We talked about that a little bit last night. But there may be some other things that you eventually want to pull into this too, of budget planning and perhaps debt management or audit trails. These are things I know that there's perhaps hundreds, if not thousands, of other organizations that are all interested in as well. So there's bases that are in your interest to find collaboration with others as well. Some of these tasks I think you've already done, and I think you've had a lot of success at it. I think you've already been working very hard for a number of years to develop best practices in budget classification. And talking with Marta, I think her and others have built careers on trying to do this. There is this sense that not everybody is at these same steps, so bear with me on this for a minute. There are some questions about how do you build best practices for a unified chart of account integrated in with budget classifications. How do you improve your access to Treasury and actually get to a single Treasury system and not multiple Treasury systems across an organization? In the U.S., where I'm from, strangely enough, I would argue we don't have single Treasury in everything we do either. Development of commitment controls and monitoring mechanisms, establishing cash management, electronic payment systems, digital signatures. I think you guys are working on a lot of these things. Electronic records management, and lastly, like monthly reporting of project budget and execution. These are all things I know there's a huge desire on the part of many others to find collaborators to work with. So I'm putting this out here as an opportunity for you to have to think about this for a little bit, and perhaps maybe this is a way you can start finding that community, and we'll talk about how to find it in a second. This would be it. There's already places where I think we can start. The OCA has as part of the OCA's charter is a Git repository, project roadmaps, and a lot of other tools so that you can start to charter a project and find other collaborators to work with. Within the Inter-American Development Bank, they have something just like this, and I was really heartened to see it, and I loved the fact that they're already working on electronic signatures too, and I want to learn more about that here. So I think there's already kind of the backbone to get started quickly. Project and political risk. So these exist whether you use open source or commercial software, and I think we talked about that with the project success and failure analysis early on. But change management and training are key components. You'll need to build the support of policymakers regardless of which path you take. And it was great to see the minister here taking a personal interest in this. That shows that you have you've been working on building the support and being worthy of that trust. And that's exactly what you need to do to have a successful project. I'm going to make the bold argument here that open source is actually the less risky path. You get more freedom and control of your project. And there are going to be places where you're not going to be exactly like other collaborators in other locations or countries or organizations. That's okay. You have the freedom to be different and do things your way, and they can do things in the manner that suits them as well. So that turns out to be very liberating. You're not stuck into one particular development path or one evolution approach. How long does a typical project take? This is for the commercial project, so using Oracle, using SAP. You guys beat this with your first phase pretty nicely. But the studies that have been done showing that how this works, it typically takes about 7 to 8 years. And that you think about why. Well, it's because they have a very formal, most governments have a very formal process for request for proposals, scoring, down selection, perhaps many pilots, and the legalities of procurement and acquiring vendors. In this case, you have a different challenge. And your challenge here is working to create that community and having a collaborative management strategy with others. So You notice this has a different feeling. It's more voluntary. You're soliciting interest from others. You work together to create a community roadmap. And again, you don't have to agree with every part of the community roadmap, but hopefully there's some parts of it that solve some big problems for you. With that, then you can work jointly on program development on the areas that are able to be worked on jointly. Have a pilot deployment, some early full deployments, learning from each other and other collaborators. And finally, you can get to that program maintenance stage. And this can be thought of as a bit of a cycle. I chose to demonstrate this linearly, but it could be, it really could be thought of as a cycle where there is going to be some repeats of this process as well. What questions do you have for me? I've been following this for years. I'm excited about what you're doing. Any questions? Okay. Thank you.